Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki Jai, Shri Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai, Shri Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaivam Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayat. Shinvata Swagata Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtanaha Riyantasto Hi Abhadrani Vidunoti Suritsatam Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shlokir Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Hare Krishna. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 25, The Characteristics of King Puranjana. Text 24. Stano Vyanjita Kaishorao Samavrito Nirantaro Vastrantena Niguhantim Hridaya Gajagaminim Stano Vyanjita Kaishorao Samavrito Niyantaro Vastrantena Niguhantim Hridaya Gajagaminim Stano Vyanjita Kaishorao Samavrito Nirantaro Vastrantena Niguhantim Hridaya Gajagaminim. Stano Vyanjita Kaishoro Samavrito Niyantaro Vastrantena Niguhantim Hridaya Gajagaminim. Stano Vyanjita Kaishoro Samavrito Nirantaro Vastrantena Niguhantim Hridaya Gajagaminim. Stano Vyanjita Kaishoro Samavrito Nirantaro Vastrantena Niguhantim Hridaya Gajagaminim. Stano, breasts. Vyanjita, indicating. Kaishorao, new youth. Samavrito, equally round. Nirantaro, fixed close side by side. Vastra antena, by the end of the sari. Niguhantim, trying to cover. Hridaya, out of shyness. Gajagaminim, walking just like a great elephant. Translation: With the end of her sari, the woman was trying to cover her breasts, which were equally round and well placed side by side. She again and again tried to cover them out of shyness, while she walked exactly like a great elephant. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The two breasts represent attachment and envy. The symptoms of raga and dvesha, attachment and envy, are described in Bhagavad Gita 3.34. Indriyashendriyashyarte raga dveshu vyavastitau tayorna vasam agachit tau hi asya paripantinau. Attraction and repulsion for sense objects are felt by embodied beings, but one should not fall under the control of sense and sense objects because they are stumbling blocks on the path of spiritual realization. These representatives of attachment and envy are very much unfavorable for advancement in spiritual life. One should not be attracted by the breasts of young women. The great saint Sankaracharya has described the breasts of women, especially young women, as nothing but a combination of muscles and blood. So one should not be attracted by the illusory energy of raised breasts with nipples. They are agents of Maya meant to victimize the opposite sex. Because the breasts are equally attractive, they are described as samavrito. The sex impulse remains in an old man's heart too, even up to the point of death. To be rid of such agitation, one must be very much advanced in spiritual consciousness. Like Yamuna Acharya, who said, Yad avadi mamacheta Krishna padaravinde nava nava rasa dhamani udhayam rantum asit tad avadi batanari sangame smaryamane bhavati mukta vikrashushthau nivishtavanam cha. Since I have been engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought and my lips curl with distaste. When one is spiritually advanced, he can no longer be attracted by the lumps of flesh and blood, which are the breasts of young women. The word nirantaro is significant because although the breasts are situated in different locations, the action is the same. We should not make any distinction between attachment and envy. As described in Bhagavad Gita 3.37, they are both products of Rajaguna. Kama esha krodha esha Rajaguna samudbhava. The word nirguhantim, trying to cover, indicates that even if one is tainted by kama, lobha, krodha, etc., they can be transfigured by Krishna consciousness. In other words, one can utilize kama or lust for serving Krishna. Being impelled by lust, an ordinary worker will work hard day and night. Similarly, a devotee can work hard day and night to satisfy Krishna. Just as karmis are working hard to satisfy kama krodha, a devotee should work in the same way to satisfy Krishna. Similarly, krodha or anger can be used in the service of Krishna when it is applied to the non-devotee demons. Hanumanji applied his anger in this way. He was a great devotee of Lord Ramachandra, and he utilized his anger to set fire to the kingdom of Ravana, a non-devotee demon. Thus, kama, lust, can be utilized to satisfy Krishna, and krodha, or anger, can be utilized to punish the demons. When both are used for Krishna's service, they lose their material significance and become spiritually important. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschacha Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. With the end of her sari, the woman was trying to cover her breasts, which were equally round and well placed side by side. She again and again tried to cover them out of shyness while she walked exactly like a great elephant. something you should not tell your wife. You walk like a great elephant today. Hare Krishna. As always, I ask for the blessings and mercy of all the assembled Vaishnavas that I may speak something on today's verse in line with what Srila Prabhupada is saying, that is purifying and pleasing to the ears and hearts of all of the devotees. I got such a purport today. So yes, we are in the section of the Bhagavatam, and we are diving into the story or the allegory of King Puranjana. And through the various verses, we have seen how Puranjana is looking for a suitable place to live all over the material creation. He finally finds a place, and there's description of this very beautiful garden-like city that he has entered. And while he's exploring the city, he encounters a beautiful woman. And we are now in a section of the chapter which is describing her bodily features. And at first glance, you will think, why is the Bhagavatam talking about something so explicit and in such detail? And in some other parts as well of the Bhagavatam, different sections, these topics are described, or there's certain descriptions that are given, and they're so they're explicit, for want of a better word, and you don't really know what to do with it or how to feel about it. But the Bhagavatam does not avoid difficult topics. The Bhagavatam is here, actually, to give us a true spiritual understanding of everything in the world. And the Bhagavatam is here, actually, we could say, to show the psychological forces behind material conditioning and material life. I was listening in preparing for today's lecture. One of the speakers was saying that they heard a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, a disciple, shared how they once heard Prabhupada say that every psychological instance that we find in the world and we find in our life can be encountered somewhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Srimad Bhagavatam has an explanation and an understanding for everything in that we are going through in this material world. So sometimes we think, or we have this understanding that, in spiritual circles, in the process of bhakti, there is no space for certain discussions and certain topics to come up. But the Bhagavatam is showing us that we have to spiritualize our understanding of everything, because if we do not discuss certain quote-unquote explicit or dangerous things, that is actually dangerous for our spiritual life. Because ultimately, we should bring everything into the light of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and in that way we can normalize our understanding of what is actual reality in that way. Because the Bhagavatam is here actually to show the futility of material existence and to bring us towards the process of Krishna consciousness. So in this section of the Bhagavatam, yes, it's a very graphic description of her body, but let's look at it in the context of what the story of Puranjana is actually about. Puranjana is not the story of a man who's attracted to the woman. He is a representation of the living entity, and the living entity's attraction to the material conditioning and the material nature. So when we look at it in that sense, we identify a lot, because Puranjana is us, the living entity, in that sense. He doesn't just represent a man, So the description applies to all of us, because all of us are here because we have some attraction to material nature. As Puranjana, we will read in the coming verses, as he is attracted to the woman and as he falls down and so on and so forth, so too the living entity goes through that journey of fall down in the material world. So today's verse in particular is talking about two subtle or psychological forces or aspects that bind the soul in the material realm: raga and dvesha, attachment and envy. And Prabhupada is in the purport, he is referring also to how he speaks about it in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 3rd chapter. There, in that verse, it's called attachment and repulsion, or attachment and envy. So every decision we make in our life, in some way, is governed by these two forces. They can fall into either one of these categories, attachment or repulsion or envy. I like this person, I don't like this person. Simple, I like this job, I don't like this job, things like that. I should be doing better than that person. Why are they doing so much better than me? Every experience we have in life can be broadly categorized into one of these two things. So attachment and envy, we could say then, are two sides of the same coin. They're just the reverse or the flip of each other. Why? Because every relationship or every activity in the world is backed up by one of them. Whichever one it is your choice. Sometimes, yes, we envy other people. Why? Because we're attached to what they have in that sense, right? So we can see that in the material world, when we are covered by material conditioning, the natural byproduct of that is envy. Sometimes we may have this understanding that just attachment is a problem, that if I'm too attached to worldly things, then I have a problem. But the Bhagavatam is saying it's not just attachment, it's repulsion as well. You can love something too much, attachment, that's a problem. But if you hate something, envy, repulsion, that's also a problem. Why? Because either way, whichever side of the coin you fall on, your mind is absorbed in whatever that thing is. Either too attached or too envious. If you love something, that's all you think about. If you hate something, that's all you think about as well, right? So Krishna says, this is the point, that real freedom from attachment and envy, or the yogi strives to be neutral, not too attached and not too envious. Because from that space of neutrality is when you can start seeing spiritual reality. Because why? You understand the uselessness of the material sense objects around you. There's the verse in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Matra sparshas tu konteya sitosna sukha dukkata agama payano nityas tam stitishasva bharata. That, the things that arise from sense perceptions, they come and go like the winter and summer seasons. But what does Krishna say? We should learn to tolerate these things without being disturbed by them in that way. Another thing this chapter or this section of the Bhagavatam highlights, it's speaking about, material conditioning and the living entity, how the foundation for material conditioning and material life is sex desire, which is something we touched upon in previous verses. That is the sort of foundation for everything here. But in this verse, we can also see how when we speak about something like lust, lust is not just limited to sexual attraction. That's one aspect of what lust is. But lust actually refers to any kind of motive that I have for some personal sense gratification. Anything that is selfish in me arises from lust, or lust is pushing on in that way. Every push that I'm feeling from my mind, from my ego, to obtain what I want for my enjoyment, for my pleasure, for my peace, that is lust. You can explain it like when you take milk, and when milk is touched by some kind of acid, it turns into yogurt. So similarly, we have, as originally we are part and parcel of Krishna, so we are made from that Satchit Ananda, right? So the original spiritual love that we have, which belongs for Krishna, which is for Krishna, when we come down to the material world and we are touched by the material energy, the love we have is transformed into lust. And here, what does that lust manifest as? So many things, right? The desire we have just to control things in our life, to acquire the things we need for a comfortable situation, or to just control and dominate over our environment in that way. And you see it. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki jai, Shri Giriraj Govardhan ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. And you can see the gross and the subtle ways that we try to control. You see it in the simplest thing, the relationships we have with our friends, right? They're trying to tell us something about their experience, but we're not listening to them. And we just say, no, this is what you should have done. You should have said this, you should have said that. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? You're trying to control their reaction or their outlook on life, that dominating control. Whether you're conscious or unconscious of it, it's always there. This funny thing, my mother brought this to my attention. We have some devotees who come and do service of cleaning vegetables. And when you just observe them, sometimes one person tries to tell the other one, no, cut it like this. Why are you cutting it like that? But why are you doing it like this? Why not like that? It's bad enough we're trying to control everything about ourselves, but then we push it onto other people and try to control every aspect of them as well. And then what comes from this lust? We know from the Bhagavad Gita, from lust arises all these other kinds of anarthas: greed, anger, envy, madness, illusion, and eventually it leads to the complete bewilderment of the soul, right? And we see the consequences of this everywhere around us. If you just look at the material world, right? The intense competition that people have, consciously or unconsciously, amongst each other. If you work in the corporate world, the pressure that's on your shoulders to perform, to hit daily, monthly, yearly targets, those kind of things. People are just burning out. You read so many articles about, I'm in my early 30s now, and I read so many articles about people younger than me from the corporate world who are having heart attacks, because of the pressure that they're under, that they want to build this kind of life, or they have to meet this kind of existence, and they can't manage it. Why? Because it's not natural. So we have heart attacks, and unfortunately some pass away, some have serious health conditions. Then what happens, right? Because why? Material life is this constant cycle of desire and frustration. Because you have a desire, you wanted to fulfill it, you're trying to fulfill it, it's being blocked by some kind of aspect. So you get frustrated, and you try another way, and it's blocked, and you try another way, and it's blocked. And it's not a new thing, The Bhagavatam is there for this reason, to show us that it's not just us that are going through the problems that we're going through. They're there from time immemorial, but there is a spiritual solution for them. If you look at, I think it's the 9th canto, the pastime of King Yayati. King Yayati is an emperor, and he's old, he's very old. But he wants to continue enjoying. So what does he do? He has 3 sons. He asks each of them to exchange their youth for his old age. So he can enjoy again because he has a young wife and he wants to, enjoy with her. So, this thing if you're familiar, reverse aging. There's this concept now in the world. People are paying millions and millions of dollars to reverse their aging, to stay as young as possible for as long as possible. It's not now, it's from King Yayati's time, where he exchanges his youth, and one of his sons eventually does agree, right? So we can see these things are there. Prabhupada has written a book called Transcendental Civilization, and in that book, Prabhupada makes the comment of how, human beings in the modern world, they're just building attractive apartments for a more sophisticated animal life, basically, which is what we are trying to do here. This is what attachment and envy are pushing us towards, slowly and slowly. And we see in today's purport how even an old man is not free from these pushings, attachment and envy, or sex desire, even up to the point of death. You can be on your deathbed. There's the example I made the last time. Prabhupada says of the old man, he's on the brink of dying, but a young woman enters the room and his eyes light up and he, points towards her. So even at the moment of death, so even something like old age won't free you from your conditioning, just living life and going through the motions that you have to, right? So what does that show us? That material conditioning is not just some biological thing that we work through and with time it goes away. Material conditioning is very, very psychological and it's very, very subtle. It's here as well, right? We know through all of the lives that we've been through, we're carrying so much of impressions of raga and dvesha in our consciousness and in our heart. We know so much, but there's so much more that we don't know that we're carrying subtly. So this is why the process of bhakti yoga is so important, because the purification that we go through, it can't just be something external, because we're dealing with something that is very psychological and very internal. So that is why Krishna consciousness is there, and this is why again and again we say it's not just that you reject or you suppress or repress the emotions, the impulses you're feeling. You have to purify them through spiritual practice. Because as Prabhupada is saying, Prabhupada gives us a lot of hope in the second half of the purport, that even if you have all of these negative tendencies, you can transform them in your devotional service. Everything can be used and utilized in some way for the service of Krishna. And Prabhupada gives the example again of anger, how Hanuman used his anger to burn down Lanka, right? And how like Prabhupada says in the purport about how the man who is impelled by lust works day and night for his sense enjoyment, but we can work day and night for Krishna in that way. So how lust can become devotional enthusiasm in that way. So the path of bhakti is not there to destroy any of the energy that we have. It's there to redirect the energy that we have. Because as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he asks Arjuna, what can you get from repression? Nothing. Nothing comes from repression. But still sometimes we feel like the problem is not internal. The problem is external. It is other people. It is the environment I'm in. It is the circumstances that life has put me in. But the Bhagavatam is showing us that the real problem is within the heart, actually. It's what's in our heart that has been sitting there that shouldn't be there, that is causing all of these problems. And that is why we say that real transformation, it's not just a change of behavior, but it's a change of heart as well. Because we know the process of Krishna consciousness, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, as Prabhupada says, is there to cleanse the heart of the impurities that have come for millions and millions of lifetimes. So the Srimad Bhagavatam takes us from this, we could say, selfish existence of what do I want, what do I need? And it redirects us to ask, what does Krishna want? What does Krishna need? What does Krishna expect from me? And through that understanding and trying to live that life, we find the absorption or the solution, that the Bhagavatam is presenting is absorption in Krishna, ultimately. But we can say all of these things, and theoretically, yes, we can understand all of them, and theoretically we have a lot of, if we could say, freedom. But then there's theoretical freedom, and then there's practical freedom. Because yes, I can sit here and say there's raga and dvesha, and they're two sides of the same coin, but I'll get off the Vyasa and I'll tell someone what to do, what I think they should do. It's very hard, practically, to not give in to these things, even unconsciously, because for us it is who we are. It is what we do, right? And that is why we see so many people outside of spiritual practice and even inside of spiritual practice. We have these identity crises that we go through. who am I? Even as a devotee, theoretically, yes, I know who I am. I'm a spirit soul, eternal part and parcel of Krishna. My duty is to serve him, and that is my relationship with him. Yes, I know that. But who am I? Practically, I don't know what being a servant of Krishna means. I don't know what being part and parcel means. I don't know what it means to live in Satchit Ananda, eternity, knowledge, and bliss. I don't, practically speaking. And yes, I have some idea of what it is to be a good devotee. And I have that identity and I put it on myself. Okay, externally I know what I need to do to be a good devotee, so let me identify with that. And then I just, throughout our whole life, from childhood, we put all of these layers of who we are, who we're supposed to be, who I shouldn't be, on top and on top and on top of us, right? I don't like this about myself, I should change it. This person or the world doesn't like this habit, I'll change it. So we chop and change and chop and change all of the layers, one on top of another, that we put on top. And we go so far. But at some point, even as devotees, we have to start going internally into all of these layers that we have and do a deep clean of all of the layers we have on us. Why am I doing what I'm doing, materially or spiritually? What is the reasoning behind why I'm here? What am I trying to prove with what I'm doing? How do I justify who I am as a devotee, even? And the behavior that I And we see this sometimes, you're practicing for so many years, 10, 20, 30 years, and then you reach a point and you ask, like, what's wrong with me? I've been practicing for so long, I'm doing everything right, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be. I should be more pure by now, And sometimes we even become angry with ourselves, we become angry with Krishna. And we say, what do you want from me? I'm doing what you're saying I should be doing, so what's happening here? And then, you ask the devotees for help and you share what you're going through internally, and the devotees are like, oh, well, you're in Maya. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, I know I'm in Maya, but what do I do to get out of Maya? Can you help me with that? And what do they say? Oh, just chant. Yes, I'm chanting, it's not helping me, right? So we can see, even sometimes as long-term practicing devotees, life is still one big identity crisis, right, after another. Because, what are we told? No, that when we come to Krishna consciousness, you find all of the answers to everything, right? And, I'm a devotee now, I don't have to concern myself with the mundane, everything's transcendental, because naturally, when we come to the process of Krishna consciousness, all the auspicious things manifest in the heart. And yes, they do, right? Of course, there's no doubt about what Srila Prabhupada is saying about the purity of what we are doing. But still, when the pure, auspicious things manifest and start, they're coming into our heart, but so much is there that is unpure, and they start pushing those things out to make space, right? But still, we keep trying to fix who we are. It's like, do you know what like a Russian nesting doll is? It's the doll inside the doll, and it's like a big doll, then you open it, and there's a smaller one, and you open it, the small one, and you open it until there's like this really tiny doll. We're like that. We have all of these layers of identity, and we have to open and open until eventually you come and there's the living entity. And he's being crushed by all of these layers that we've put on top of it. We're just buried in there somewhere, right? But if we want to actually advance spiritually, we have to realistically face everything that is internally within us, all of the anarthas that are there, raga, dvesha, kama, krodha, lobha, all of these things that are coming out. And sometimes in our practice, when these unpleasant things come out, we think, oh, this shouldn't be happening, right? I'm a practicing devotee, I shouldn't be faced with these kind of things. But the process of bhakti, it begins by revealing the impurities that we have in our heart that are already inside of it. You can take the example of like if you want to make ghee. So if you want to make ghee, you take butter and you melt it on the stove, and you leave it on a very, very low flame, and you just leave it to kind of, simmer and boil for a very, very long time. But what happens in the beginning? All of the salt and foam and impurities, they rise to the top. And what you're supposed to do is scoop all of that out, and eventually what you're left with is ghee in its purest form. But if you take this example and apply it to us as devotees, what do we do when these things come up? We stir it back in. We just push it back down. We don't do anything with it. So yes, the practice is going to bring out all of these things inside us, but we have to scoop it out. We can't just push it down and mix it back in, because then you're not going to get anything pure from that, right? And then we wonder, oh, what's taking so long? But when things are coming up, are you dealing with them and scraping them out of your heart? Or are you pushing it back into somewhere even deeper and darker that hasn't been touched yet? So yes, again, theoretically we know what we're supposed to do. We hear about the stage in the process of spiritual life called anartha nivritti, right? So anartha nivritti is, when the unwanted things in the heart come up, and when we cleanse ourselves of these things. Because it's only once these unwanted things have been cleansed can real pure love for Krishna truly manifest in the heart. But practically, how do you practice anartha nivritti? What do you do when these things manifest? We don't talk about that, or we don't talk about it as much as we should, We just say, continue with the process, and yes, don't ever give up the practice. The rules and regulations of spiritual life will purify us. But sometimes we have to put in that additional work to become free of raga and dvesha in that way. And then when we talk about anarthas, sometimes we build them up in our heads, this anartha, this big dark cloud that's sitting on my shoulder. I don't know what the anartha is, I just know it's there and it's called an anartha. Right? It's a big bad thing that's going to come up, and I'm going to have to deal with it at some point. But let's break it down then into something smaller. A bad habit, for example, a conditioning that we learned as a child that we're still doing now, like a very common one is people pleasing, A conditioning that you have that doesn't actually serve your spiritual life or your spiritual identity in any way. A behavior that you have that's standing in the way of your devotion, right? And when we think about these things, then what's naturally attached to that is the shame that you have for having this conditioning or this behavior. So instead of addressing it because we feel shame about something, we push it aside and we pretend it's not there. Because again, it's part of your identity, and we're also afraid. If I don't have this thing, even though it causes me problems, who am I without that? Without that conditioning. If I'm not for example, a people pleaser, who am I? That's a scary thought for a lot of people, and we don't want to deal with that. So we just push it aside and continue with the external practices. But one thing I heard in this week, I was listening to a podcast with a disciple of Srila Prabhupada called Sukavaha, Dasi. And she was just sharing, her experience of being in the movement, of being a devotee for, 40, 50 years. She joined in, I think, 1971. And it's so interesting. Just as a side note, I really admire that she's still a devotee. She was one of, if you're familiar with ISKCON history, you'll know that there was a time in the movement where devotees were kidnapped and deprogrammed. They were taken away, and they were trying to deprogram them. You're following a cult, you're doing all. So the people would use all of these psychological techniques to do things to them. She was one of those devotees who was kidnapped, actually, for deprogramming. But she managed to escape, and she's still a devotee so many years later, and she's all the more stronger for it. So it's quite amazing, her story. And she was just making the comment, because she was talking about, anarthas and identities. And habits and things like that. And she was just making the point that if you want to be a realized person, you have to be real. You can't be realized without being real in that way. And why she was, in one sense, if we could say, grateful for the hard experience that she had in her life, because it gave her an opportunity, even though she only many years later was able to process exactly what it is she went through. But she understood that one thing she understands is the hard experiences that we have in life give us opportunities to surrender to Krishna and to find a higher taste in that. And we see in the purport, Prabhupada gives the example of Yamuna Acharya, who says that when the thought of sex desire enters his mind, he spits at the thought, right, and pushes it away. Why? Because Yamuna Acharya has tasted something so much better, which is service to Krishna, absorption in Krishna. So when we give ourselves the time internally and work through the things that are coming out, we allow ourselves, or we make space in the heart for the purity and the auspiciousness that comes from the process of practicing bhakti. And we can experience that higher taste. I'm not saying that even now, with all of the impurities, we don't experience that, because we do. We come to Krishna consciousness, we find so much happiness, so much relief. And that's even from a conditioned state of existence. So can you imagine, when you're in that unconditioned pure state, how much more your experience will be in that way? Because the process ultimately should allow us to give up the taste for lower enjoyment, you know. But then sometimes, you know, we misunderstand the verse as well. I know, like, just, you know, the verse that Yamuna Acharya is speaking, I've heard people, or certain people talk about it, and they use it in the context where Yamuna Acharya, for example, is spitting at the thought of a woman, but he's not. He's not talking about the woman at all. It's not that he's a woman hater or anything like that. It's the desire that he has that's coming up for sex enjoyment. But because he has tasted something so much better, he can push it aside, right? Because he is so peaceful in his process and content in his spiritual practice, right? And just a point on, you know, how to practically address the anarthas that we have, how we can make them small. There's one example that I found that is very inspiring. In our movement, there is a group called the Bhakti Recovery Group. Maybe we're not too familiar with them here, but they're in America and Europe, and they're actually online as well. So the Bhakti Recovery Group is very amazing. I've attended one or two of their sessions. They are a 12-step program. So you're familiar with the 12-step program from, like, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, that 12-step program. But a 12-step program specifically aligned with the principles of Bhakti Yoga. And actually, when you read the 12 steps and you get into the literature, you'll see how there's a lot of similarity between us and them, and the concepts and how you can actually combine the two. So devotees have done that. They've aligned and created a 12-step program that is aligned with the principles of Bhakti Yoga, and they use the literature side by side. You know, because for the 12 steps, you know, you have the Alcoholics Anonymous and what, but then they use the Bhagavad Gita along with it, and they link it up together like that. And if you go on their website, it's very interesting. And their tagline, for example, is you know, creating a space where we can find freedom from addiction, anartha, and associated behavior. Again, we think of anartha as some big, unnameable thing that we don't know what it is. But if you break it down, what is it? An unwanted habit or conditioning that you are dealing with, whatever that conditioning may be, right? So yes, anartha nivritti, Prabhupada says, means the disappearance of all unwanted things from our lives, which allows us then to become fixed in devotional service to the Lord. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Madhya Lila, the chapter which speaks about the cleaning of the Gundicha temple. So just before the Rath Yatra, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu engages all the devotees in the cleansing of the Gundicha temple. And there's a verse that says, the Lord was very pleased with those who could cleanse the temple by taking out undesirable things accumulated within. This is called anartha nivritti, cleansing the heart of all unwanted things. In that purport of that verse, Srila Prabhupada speaks about how Lord Chaitanya gives us the instructions on how to clean, but it is up to the devotee to clean, to actually go into the heart and cleanse the heart of the unwanted things. And later in the Antya Lila, Prabhupada again comments that how someone on the stage of anartha nivritti, they understand why are they now on that stage, because they truly practically understand that there is nothing to be enjoyed or there's nothing worth being attached to in the material world. In a morning class that Srila Prabhupada gave in Vrindavan in 1975, Prabhupada speaks about this, and he says, in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is giving the lesson on how to become unattached to this material world. Maya Shakta Manapartha. If you increase your attachment for Krishna, if you become perfectly Krishna conscious, then it is possible to be detached. Your attachment gets a better engagement. Krishna consciousness means attachment for the best thing. We have got attachment. We have got attachment for our family, for our home, for our children, for our wife, for society, nation, country, and so on and so on and so on. So many attachments. Attachment is there. But with this kind of attachment, griheshu shaktasya, if you keep your attachment for these things, you will never be free from the material condition of life. Therefore, you have to convert or divert your attachment to Krishna. This is the Krishna consciousness movement. The Krishna consciousness movement means we have got attachment, but we have got attachment for false things or temporary things. If we divert our attachment, that is bhakti. Bhakti does not mean that you give up your living function. Attachment is the function of the living being. The living being is attached to his family, his wife, his children, because he is a living being. So a living being cannot give up attachment. But if we continue our attachment for these false and temporary materialistic way of life, then we will never be free from this bondage of the material condition. Therefore, you have to divert your attachment for Krishna. This is yoga, how to divert your attachment for Krishna. So we can see how ultimately everything that the Bhagavatam is presenting, however explicit and in detail it may be, ultimately it is there to bring us towards Krishna consciousness, and it is there to transform us into someone who is free from envy. Because we know in the very second verse of the Bhagavatam, so first canto, first chapter, the second verse, there is a phrase there, nirmatsara satam, that the Bhagavatam is meant for people who are free from envy, ultimately. If you look at the word for word translation of that verse that Srila Prabhupada has given, the word satam means devotee, but nirmatsaram, his word for word translation is one who is 100% pure in heart. 100% pure in heart. So we can see today, in today's verse, I thought it was interesting, a description of her breasts, but I was also thinking how, yes, biologically the function of the breast is to nourish the body, right? A new mother with a newborn child will breastfeed and give nourishment in that way. So yes, raga and dvesha is what nourishes the material conditioning and keeps us trapped in the material world. So it is for us, through the light of the Srimad Bhagavatam, to find our nourishment, our spiritual nourishment, in being authentic to our spiritual endeavor, and also not to place the burden of who we are on ourselves and on other people. We should find that space where we can purify ourselves of all of the layers that we are carrying and engage in devotional service. Hare Krishna. There's 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left. Any comments, corrections, questions? No? Breakfast time then. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanande.